The escape pod fell from the sky like a dying star, leaving a trail of fire and smoke across the cold Montana evening. And Kira Holloway watched it from her cabin porch with her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. She had lived alone on this 40-acre property for 3 years now, ever since her husband had left her for a younger woman, and she had decided that pine trees made better company than people who looked at her with pity in their eyes. And at 42 years old, she had convinced herself that solitude was a choice rather than a prison. The explosion shook the windows of her small cabin and sent birds screaming into the darkening sky. And Kira set down her coffee and grabbed her father's old hunting jacket and the flashlight she kept by the door for emergencies. Though she had never imagined an emergency quite like this one, she walked toward the smoke rising from the eastern meadow, her boots crunching on the frost-covered grass, and her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. Because she had read about first contact, and she had watched the news reports about humanity joining something called the Galactic Concord 15 years ago. But reading about aliens and walking toward a crashed spacecraft were two very different things. The pod had torn a wound through the earth nearly 100 feet long, and strange metal darker than anything she had ever seen steamed and hissed in the cold November air. And Kira approached slowly with her flashlight beam cutting through the gathering darkness. She was not a brave woman, or at least she had never thought of herself that way. And her hands trembled as she stepped closer to the wreckage, but something pulled her forward. Some instinct she could not name or explain then. She heard the sound that changed everything. It was small and weak and filled with pain. And it was unmistakably a cry for help. The kind of sound that any creature makes when it is hurt and scared and alone. And Kira had heard that sound before in her own voice during the worst nights after her divorce. She found the hatchling half buried in twisted metal and strange debris. And her flashlight beam fell upon a creature, no larger than a house cat, with scales that should have been green but had turned a sickly gray, and enormous golden eyes that reflected her light like twin moons. The little thing tried to hiss at her, tried to bare teeth that were clearly meant for something far more threatening than this broken baby could manage. And one of its wings hung at a terrible angle, while 3 of its 6 legs did not move at all. Blood, or something like blood, seeped from cuts across its serpentine body. And Kira could see its small chest heaving with labored breaths. And she knew without any doubt that this creature was dying. She knelt down slowly, keeping her movements gentle and predictable. And she spoke in the soft voice she had once used for the dog she had loved as a child. The voice that said, "I am not a threat. I want to help. Hey there, little one," she whispered. "I am not going to hurt you, I promise." The hatchling watched her with those ancient golden eyes. And in that gaze, Kira saw something she recognized immediately. Something that made her chest ache with a pain she thought she had buried long ago. She saw the look of a being that had been hurt too many times to trust easily. The look of someone who expected cruelty because cruelty was all they had ever known. The look she had seen in her own bathroom mirror for years after her marriage fell apart. Kira reached out her hand slowly, palm up, offering rather than taking, and she waited. The hatchling trembled, its small body shaking with fear and cold and pain. And for a long moment, it simply stared at her hand, as if trying to decide whether this was a trick, whether this strange creature with the soft voice was just another threat in a universe full of threats. Then, slowly, so slowly that Kira almost missed it, the hatchling stretched out its neck and pressed its head against her palm. The scales were warm despite the cold night air, and Kira felt something strange bloom in her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. A connection she could not explain but could not deny. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, little one, I have got you now. You are safe." She did not know if the creature could understand her words, but she hoped it could understand her tone, the gentleness in her voice, the promise in her touch. Carefully, so carefully, she gathered the broken hatchling into her arms, cradling it against her chest like a baby. And the creature made a small sound that might have been pain or might have been relief. Kira carried it back to her cabin, walking slowly to avoid jostling its injuries. And the hatchling watched her the entire way with those golden eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. She laid it on the couch and examined its wounds as best she could. And she found a strange medical kit in the wreckage when she went back to search. And she spent the entire night cleaning cuts and setting the broken wing and trying to keep this little creature alive. She did not sleep. And she did not leave its side. And when dawn broke over the Montana mountains, the hatchling was still breathing. Kira called the emergency number that all humans had been given when the Galactic Concorde made contact. And she explained what had happened in a voice hoarse from a night without rest. And the person on the other end promised that someone would come to assess the situation. But as she hung up the phone and looked at the small creature sleeping on her couch, wrapped in blankets she had warmed in the dryer, Kira felt something she had not felt in years. She felt needed. She felt like she had a purpose again. Like there was a reason to wake up in the morning. Like maybe her life was not just an empty stretch of days waiting for an end. The Tavusdis. Hatchling stirred in its sleep and made a small purring sound like distant thunder. And Kira sat down beside it and placed her hand gently on its head. "I do not know what you are or where you came from," she whispered, "but I'm going to take care of you. I promise." And in that moment, alone in her cabin with a dying alien creature she had known for only hours, Kira Holloway made a choice that would change the course of her life forever. She chose to care. She chose to hope. She chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, something broken could be made whole again. 3 weeks passed and the hatchling grew stronger with each day. And Kira had converted her spare bedroom into a medical ward using knowledge from veterinary websites and careful study of the strange equipment she had salvaged from the wreckage. She had started calling the creature Ember because of the faint warmth that radiated from its scales when it slept, a gentle heat that reminded her of coals glowing in a fireplace. And the name seemed to fit this small being that had survived a crash that should have killed it. Ember could not speak in words that Kira understood, but it communicated in other ways, through soft sounds and gentle touches and those enormous golden eyes that seemed to understand everything she said, even when she was just talking to fill the silence. The Galactic Concorde had sent a representative to assess the situation, a tall insectoid being named Commissioner Veth, who had arrived in a sleek silver vessel that landed in the meadow where the escape pod had crashed. Veth examined both the wreckage and the hatchling with clinical detachment, his compound eyes reflecting light in ways that made Kira uncomfortable. And he clicked his mandibles softly as he reviewed data on a device she could not read. "This creature is a Drethin," Veth explained in a voice that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "A species that was nearly exterminated during what we call the Hegemony Wars. And the survivors are scattered across the galaxy, traumatized and few in number." Kira listened with growing horror as the commissioner described the genocide that had reduced the Drethin population from billions to mere thousands. The systematic hunting of a species that had once been among the most respected in the galaxy. Why would anyone do that to them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Drethin possessed the ability to form psychic bonds with other beings, Veth said. Bonds that allow deep communication and emotional connection. And this ability made them invaluable as diplomats and mediators and peacekeepers. He paused, his mandibles clicking in what Kira had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. It also made them targets for those who wished to use them as weapons and slaves. And the hegemony sought to capture and control them, and when the Drethin refused to serve, the hegemony decided to destroy them instead. Kira looked at Ember, who had crawled under the blankets on the couch and was watching the commissioner with obvious fear. and she felt a surge of protective anger that surprised her with its intensity. "What happens to Ember now?" she asked. "Standard protocol dictates placement in a Concord rehabilitation facility." Veth replied, "The Drethin are a protected species, and there are procedures that must be followed." Something cold settled in Kira's stomach at those words, and she opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, Ember moved. The hatchling crawled out from under the blankets and made its way across the floor to where Kira sat, and it wrapped itself around her ankle and pressed its head against her leg. Trembling so hard she could feel the vibrations through her jeans, Veth watched this for a long moment, his compound eyes unreadable. "Then again," he said slowly, "there is precedent for alternative arrangements, and the Drethin are known to form what we call selection bonds with their caregivers." "Selection bonds," Kira repeated. "A Drethin selects its family," Veth explained. "Not through blood or birth, but through choice. And it is a psychic imprint that is permanent and profound. And a bond once formed is considered sacred under Concord law." He tilted his head in a gesture that seemed almost human. "Has this creature shown signs of selection toward you?" Kira thought about the past 3 weeks, about the way Ember always wanted to be near her, about the strange warmth she felt in her chest whenever she held the hatchling, about the dreams she had started having that felt like they belonged to someone else. "I do not know what that would look like," she admitted. "You would feel it," Veth said simply. "A warmth in your chest that has no physical source. A sense of connection that defies explanation. A certainty that this being belongs with you and you with it." He paused. "The bond works both ways. And if this hatchling has begun the selection process with you, separating you would cause it tremendous psychological harm." That night, after the commissioner had departed with promises to return in 1 month for a formal assessment, Kira sat beside Ember's nest of blankets with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The hatchling watched her with those ancient golden eyes, and Kira felt the weight of everything she had learned pressing down on her shoulders. "I do not know how to take care of you," she admitted, speaking into the quiet of her cabin. "I barely know how to take care of myself most days, and I have made so many mistakes in my life, and I do not want to make mistakes with you." Ember made a soft sound, something between a purr and a chirp, and it crawled out of its nest and into her lap with a confidence it had not shown before it. Hatchling pressed its head against her palm, and the warmth that spread through Kira's chest was unmistakable. A feeling like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. A sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. She understood then what Veth had meant about selection, about the bond that the Drethin formed with their chosen family. And she understood that Ember had chosen her, not because she was special or qualified or deserving, but simply because Ember had looked at her and decided that she was worth trusting. Tears rolled down Kira's face, and she did not try to stop them. "I was so alone," she whispered. "For so long I was alone, and I thought that was just how my life was going to be." Ember purred against her chest, and through the bond she felt something that was not quite words, but was unmistakably communication. A feeling of safety and warmth and home, and somewhere deep inside Kira Holloway, in a place she had thought was dead forever, something broken began to mend. She held Ember close and made a silent promise that she would protect this creature with everything she had, that she would be the family that this orphaned hatchling deserved, that she would never let anything hurt it again. It was a promise she would be called upon to keep sooner than she could have imagined. 6 months had passed as the night. Kira found the broken hatchling in the wreckage of the escape pod, and in that time, Ember had grown to the size of a German shepherd with scales that shimmered like liquid emeralds in the sunlight. The damaged wing had healed, though it still hung slightly lower than the other, and Ember had begun to speak, first in halting telepathic impressions that felt like colors and emotions more than words. Then in clearer and more complex thoughts that formed in Kira's mind like her own memories. Mother who chose, Ember would call her. And each time the hatchling used that title, something fierce and protective swelled in Kira's heart until she thought it might burst. She had learned everything she could about the Drethin in the past months. Reading files that Commissioner Veth had provided and searching the galactic databases that humanity now had access to. And what she learned filled her with both wonder and horror. The Drethin had once numbered in the billions. A species of telepathic beings who served as the peacekeepers and diplomats of the galaxy, whose ability to form bonds allowed them to understand and mediate conflicts that other species could not resolve, but that same ability had made them targets during the Hegemony Wars, when a coalition of expansionist powers had sought to enslave them for military purposes, to use their bond-forming ability to control populations and crush resistance. When the Drethin refused to serve as weapons, the Hegemony had decided that if they could not control these beings, no one would. And the genocide that followed had reduced a proud civilization to scattered refugees hiding in the dark spaces between stars. The pirates who had attacked Ember's convoy were remnants of that coalition, still hunting Drethin survivors for the black market trade in bonded servants. And Kira felt sick every time she thought about what those monsters had intended for her daughter. Yes, her daughter, because that was what Ember was now. Not by blood or birth, but by the choice they had both made. The bond that connected them in ways Kira was still learning to understand. The evening started like any other, with Kira cooking dinner while Ember sprawled across the kitchen floor. The hatchling's presence, a warm comfort that had become as essential to Kira as breathing. Then Ember's head snapped up, those golden eyes going wide with a terror that Kira felt through their bond like ice water in her veins. Mother, Ember's voice rang in her mind. They are coming. The hunters are coming. I can feel them. Kira dropped the pan she was holding and ran to the window, and her blood went cold at what she saw descending from the darkening sky. 3 ships, ugly and scarred with the marks of countless battles, were landing in the meadow where the escape pod had crashed all those months ago, and figures were emerging from them. Figures that moved with the predatory grace of beings who had done terrible things and enjoyed doing them. She counted 8 of them as they spread out and began moving toward her cabin. And she recognized them from the files she had studied, from the warnings that Commissioner Veth had given her about the dangers that still hunted Drethin survivors. The leader was a being that resembled a bipedal hyena, with matted fur and teeth that had been filed to points, and it walked with the swagger of someone who had never faced real resistance and did not expect to find any here. Kira grabbed her grandfather's hunting rifle from the cabinet where she kept it, and her hands were steady even though her heart was racing, and she loaded it with the calm precision that came from years of practice on the shooting range her father had built. Ember, she said quietly, go to the hiding place we prepared. The one under the floorboards in the back bedroom. Mother, no. I will not leave you. You will do as I say, Kira replied, and her voice carried an authority she had not known she possessed. The voice of a mother protecting her child. I need you to be safe so I can focus on what I have to do. Through their bond, she felt Ember's fear and resistance, but also the trust that had grown between them over months of healing together. And finally, the hatchling moved toward the back of the cabin. Kira went to the front door and opened it, stepping onto the porch with her rifle held at her side. And she faced the creatures who had come to take her daughter, the hyena-like being stopped about 20 feet from the porch, its followers fanning out behind it, and it grinned at her with those sharpened teeth. I am called Grath, it said in a voice like grinding metal, and I have come for the Drethin hatchling. And you would be wise to give it to me without resistance. There is no Drethin here, Kira said. Her voice flat and cold. Grath laughed, and it was an ugly sound that made Kira's skin crawl. Do not lie to me? Human, we have been tracking that creature for months. And we know it is here, and we know you have formed some kind of attachment to it." The pirate took a step closer, and its eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "Give me the hatchling, and you live. Refuse, and we will take it anyway. But you will not enjoy what follows." Kira felt Ember's terror through their bond, felt the memories crashing through her daughter's mind. Fire and screaming, and the smell of burning scales, and the sight of clutchmates being dragged away to fates worse than death. And in that moment, something changed inside Kira Holloway. She had spent years believing herself to be broken, useless, unworthy of love or connection. A woman who had been thrown away by the people who were supposed to care about her, but standing between monsters and the creature who had chosen her as family. Kira discovered something that humans had always known about themselves. Even when they forgot, they did not break when things got hard. They got dangerous. She raised her rifle and looked Grath directly in its predator eyes. And her voice was steady as stone. "You want my daughter," she said. "Then come and take her." The fight that followed would later be recorded in Galactic Concord archives as the Montana Incident. And military scholars across 17 star systems would study it for generations, trying to understand how a single human female with no combat training had defeated 8 armed raiders who had terrorized shipping lanes for decades. But in the moment, Kira was not thinking about archives or scholars or anything beyond keeping her daughter alive. Grath laughed when she raised her rifle, a sound of genuine amusement at the idea that this small, soft creature with her primitive weapon could pose any threat to hunters who had killed beings far more dangerous than a human. Woman, that laughter was the last mistake Grath would ever make. Kira fired, and the shot took one of the raiders in the shoulder, spinning it around and dropping it to the ground with a howl of pain. And in the instant of confusion that followed, she was already moving. She had lived on this land for 3 years. Had walked every inch of it in her lonely wanderings, had learned its secrets the way a person learns the face of someone they love. And now that knowledge became her weapon. She was through the back door of the cabin before the raiders recovered from their shock, and she disappeared into the forest that she knew like her own heartbeat. And the hunt began, but the hunters had become the hunted. First raider to follow her into the trees was a scaled creature with 4 arms and confidence that bordered on arrogance. And it crashed through the underbrush with no thought of stealth or caution. Kira dropped it with a shot to the leg, then finished it with a blow from a fallen branch before it could rise. And she was gone into the darkness before its companions could react. The second raider she led into a ravine she knew was unstable from spring flooding. And she watched from the shadows as the earth gave way beneath its feet, and it tumbled into the darkness with a scream that cut off abruptly through her bond with Ember. She could feel her daughter's presence, could sense the hatchling's terror, but also something else. Something that felt like wonder and fierce pride. "Mother," Ember's voice whispered in her mind. "I can help you. I can show you where they are. Stay hidden." Kira replied through the bond. "I am Drethin," Ember said. And there was a strength in that voice that Kira had never heard before. "We protect our family. This is what we were meant for." And suddenly Kira could feel them, could sense the positions of every raider through Ember's telepathic abilities, could feel their emotions like lights in the darkness. The remaining raiders were afraid. They had come expecting easy prey, a soft human and a traumatized hatchling. But instead they had found something that hunted them through the pines like a ghost. Something that struck from the shadows and vanished before they could react. Grath was screaming orders, trying to organize its crew. But panic had taken hold and the raiders were scattered and terrified. Kira used that fear like another weapon. She appeared at the edge of their vision and then was gone. She made sounds that drew them into traps she had prepared. She let them see glimpses of her that sent them running in the wrong direction. 2 more raiders fell to her rifle. Clean shots that came from the darkness without warning. and the survivors began to break. "Mother," Ember's voice came again. "Let me show them what they have done. Let me make them see." Kira hesitated for only a moment before she felt her daughter's determination through their bond. Felt the power that had been suppressed by trauma, finally ready to emerge. "Do it," she said. Ember stepped out of the hiding place beneath the cabin. Small and still healing, but blazing with a light that had nothing to do with fire. And the Drethin's telepathic presence washed over the remaining raiders. Like a tidal wave, they screamed, because suddenly they were experiencing every cruelty they had ever inflicted. Every life they had destroyed. Every child they had torn from its parents. Every being they had sold into slavery. The psychic assault was not violence in the physical sense, but it was devastating nonetheless, forcing them to confront the weight of their crimes in a way they had never allowed themselves to do. Two of the raiders fled screaming into the night, their minds shattered by the guilt they had always refused to feel. And they would be found 3 days later by Concord authorities, catatonic and broken beyond any hope of recovery that left only Grathi. Pirate leader had fallen to its knees under the weight of Ember's psychic assault. But its mind was harder than its followers, tempered by years of cruelty into something that could resist the guilt. Grath rose, shaking, and its eyes found Ember standing in front of the cabin. And hatred twisted its features into something inhuman. The pirate raised a weapon that glowed with deadly energy and aimed it at the hatchling. "If I cannot have you," Grath snarled, "then no one will." Kira stepped out of the trees, a rifle already at her shoulder, and she pulled the trigger. The shot was perfect, placed exactly between Grath's eyes, and the pirate leader was dead before its body hit the ground. Silence fell over the meadow, broken only by the soft sounds of the forest returning to life now that the violence had ended. Ember ran to Kira and pressed against her legs, trembling, and Kira dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "It is over," she whispered. "You are safe now. I have got you." Through their bond, she felt Ember's emotions, the relief and the fear and the overwhelming love. And she held her daughter close as the last of the adrenaline faded from her system when the Concord authorities arrived an hour later, summoned by an emergency beacon in the original escape pod that Kira had activated during the fight. They found a human woman sitting on her cabin porch with a Drethin hatchling cradled against her chest. The lead officer, a being that resembled a walking tree, surveyed the battlefield with obvious shock. "What happened here?" it asked. Kira looked up, exhausted and covered in dirt and blood that was not her own. And her voice was perfectly calm. "I would like to file a complaint about trespassers on my property." 1 year had passed since the night Kira found the broken hatchling in the wreckage of the escape pod. And the woman who stood on her cabin porch watching the ships descend from the sky was not the same person she had been 12 months ago. She was stronger now, in body and spirit, and the loneliness that had once defined her life had been replaced by a bond that filled every empty space in her heart. Ember stood beside her, no longer a small broken thing, but a being the size of a small horse, with scales that caught the morning light like scattered jewels and wings that could carry them both into the sky. Commissioner Veth had sent word that a Vinequervan that a faint word that a delegation of Drethin elders wished to meet Kira, to assess the bond between her and Ember, and to determine whether the selection was genuine and complete. Kira had expected to be nervous, but she felt only calm as the ships landed and their passengers emerged. The Drethin elders were ancient beings. Their scales faded to silver with age, and they moved with a dignity that spoke of civilizations, risen and fallen and risen again. The eldest among them was called Senthara, and she approached Kira with slow, deliberate steps while the others hung back through her bond with Ember. Kira could feel the telepathic examination beginning, a gentle but thorough probing of her memories and her heart. And she did not resist. Let them see, she thought. Let them see everything I am. Senthara studied her for a long time without speaking. those ancient golden eyes seeing things that no words could describe. And Kira met that gaze without flinching. "You are damaged," Centaura finally said. And her voice was like wind through ancient trees. "Scarred by your own kind, abandoned and alone." "Yes," Kira agreed. "Because there was no point in denying what was true. Yet when our child needed protection, you did not hesitate. You killed for it. You would have died for it." "Yes." Why, it was such a simple question. And yet it contained everything that mattered. Kira thought about her answer carefully because she wanted to be honest. Wanted to explain something that she had only recently come to understand herself. "Because Ember chose me," she said finally. "And I chose Ember, and that is what family means." She paused, feeling Ember's warmth against her side, feeling the bond between them pulse with love and trust and certainty. Family is not something you earn or deserve. It is something you decide. You look at someone and you decide that they matter more than yourself. And then you act like it. She met Centra's eyes. "I did not save Ember because I was brave or special. I saved Ember because that is what you do when someone becomes your family. You protect them with everything you have, even when you are scared, even when the odds are against you." Centaura was silent for another long moment. And through the bond, Kira could feel the elder's emotions. Surprise and something that might have been recognition. "Our people have searched the galaxy for allies since the genocide," Centaura said slowly. "We have found sympathy and tolerance and pity. But we have rarely found what you humans call love." The ancient Drethan took a step closer, and her voice softened. "Not true love. The kind that fights and bleeds and refuses to surrender. The kind that looks at a broken stranger and says, 'You are mine now, and I will protect you.'" Centaura bowed her head, a gesture of respect that made the other elders gasp softly. "You are not simply Ember's guardian. Human. Through the selection bond, you are now connected to every surviving Drethan. You are family to us all." Ember pressed against Kira's side. And through their bond, she felt her daughter's joy, a brightness that filled her mind like sunlight. "I told you, Mother," Ember said. "We choose well," Kira laughed, and tears streamed down her face. "And she did not try to hide them. I was alone for so long," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was not meant to be loved." Centaura reached out and placed a gentle hand on Kira's shoulder. And the touch was warm and comforting. "There was something different about you," the elder said gently. "You had not yet found the ones who needed you. The broken often make the best guardians for the broken, because we understand the value of healing in the years that followed." Kira Holloway became something she never expected, an ambassador between humanity and the Drethan remnant, a bridge between two species who had both known loss and loneliness. Her cabin in Montana became a sanctuary for traumatized hatchlings, a place where beings too damaged by war and cruelty could learn to trust again, could learn that not everyone in the universe wanted to hurt them. She was never alone again. And Ember, the broken hatchling who had crashed into her life on a cold November evening, grew into a being of remarkable power and compassion, a leader among the Drethan who worked to rebuild what had been destroyed when asked to explain why humans had proven to be such effective allies for the Drethan. Ember's answer became famous across the galaxy. "Humans understand brokenness," Ember would say. "They understand loss and loneliness and the desperate need for connection, but more importantly, they understand that healing is not something that happens to you." The great Drethan would pause, and those ancient golden eyes would grow distant with memory. "Healing is something you choose. Every day, with the people who matter. My mother chose me when I was dying and alone, and I chose her when I was too scared to trust anyone." Ember would look at whoever had asked the question, and there would be fierce pride in that voice. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the fastest, or the most advanced, but they have something that many species have lost. They have the capacity to look at something broken and see something worth saving. And somewhere in Montana, in a cabin surrounded by pine trees and filled with the sounds of hatchlings learning to trust again, Kira Holloway would smile because she had learned that the universe was vast and strange and often cruel. But it was also full of unexpected miracles, and sometimes a broken dragon hatchling and a lonely human woman could find each other across the stars and choose to become family and change each other forever.